graders, it's Miss Reed from Citizenship Academy. Today we are on Personal Narratives, Unit 1, Lesson 4, and we are talking about sensory details. So this hopefully is a review for you, but if it's not, that's okay. So when we talk about sensory details, we're talking about using one of the 5 senses. So our senses are sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. So the whole point of us using sensory details is to really create a picture for our readers, right? Like, so they can imagine that they were there, whatever we're describing, and that they could use, it's almost as if they could like sense themselves being there, right? They could hear things that were there. They could smell things that were there, right? And honestly, using sensory details, like really descriptive details, those are the most interesting stories to read because they really help you imagine like you're in the situation. I remember when I used to read Harry Potter when I was really young, the author J.K. Rowling uses a lot of sensory details, and I used to be able to imagine as if I were actually there in Hogwarts when the story was happening. So here are some examples of sensory details. So for sight, this is like without using sensory details. The socks were on the floor. Okay. Well, the socks on the floor, like you could imagine a lot of different things, right? Because it's not telling you what kind of socks they wear, like where on the floor were they. But if we use sensory details, we could say the muddy socks were piled on top of the rug. So we can imagine like these are these nasty looking socks, right? And they're really dirty and they're in like a huge pile on top of the rug. So this is just, again, how using sensory details makes our writing much more interesting, much more clear for the reader to understand. Sound, we heard the plane fly over us. Okay, so we heard a plane. What does it sound like? Like, what does it actually sound like? The plane's buzzing sound filled the air above our heads, right? So now we can actually imagine the sound the plane's making is like a buzzing sound. Like before, we're just like, we heard a plane. So it could sound like a lot of different things. But when we say the plane's buzzing sound, like I'm imagining it above my head, I'm imagining like the buzzing sound it makes. Sorry, that was not a buzzing sound that I just made. Touch, the mud was gross. Okay, well, the word gross is kind of an opinion word, and it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So if we're actually being really descriptive with how something would feel if we touched it, the mud felt slimy and cold between my toes. That it kind of made me like feel a little bit gross there for a second myself because I can imagine in my brain something, the feel of something slimy and cold between, like I can imagine that. Like I feel like I felt something like that before, and it gives you a feeling like, ooh, like when you read it. But it's much stronger than just saying the mud was gross, right? The pizza was gross. Okay, but what tastes gross to you might not taste gross to me. So what do you mean it actually tasted gross? So more descriptive with sensory details, it would say the pizza tasted like cardboard and had no flavor at all. Okay, so that pizza was obviously not very good. It didn't taste like anything. It was really bland. Like imagine eating cardboard. Like I can't even imagine eating cardboard, but like I just feel like it would taste like blech, like I don't even know. Right? So more descriptive, more sensory details, the stronger our writing and the better it is for the reader to read it. Lastly, smell, right? Her perfume smelled good. Okay, well, what smells good to me might not smell good to you. Like I really like the smell of coffee, but maybe you don't like the smell of coffee. So we really want to describe what it actually smells like. So her perfume smelled like flowers and vanilla cupcakes. So chances are you've smelled flowers and vanilla cupcakes before, so you can actually imagine these in your brain. So again, we're going to read a story today. Another CNE teacher is going to read you this story, but as you're reading, I want you to pay close attention to how the author writes this personal narrative with sensory details. There's a lot of them in here, and it actually makes the story a lot more interesting. So you're going to listen to her read the story, and I will pop back on when she is done.
4 of personal narratives, and here is our vocab for today. So a guava is a tropical fruit. That's a noun. Prickly is an adjective, and it means pointy or spiky. Embedded is an adjective, and that means it's set firmly in something. Tinge is a noun, and that is a small amount of color. Crevices, a noun. Narrow spaces. Edible, a noun. Possible to eat. Laden, adjective. Heavily loaded or weighed down. Enticing, adjective. Appealing or attractive. So we are going to read another narrative today, and this is called When I Was Puerto Rican, and it's a prologue to a story, How to Eat a Guava. And this is by Esmeralda Santiago. Esmeralda Santiago is a writer and actress. She was born in Puerto Rico in 1948 and moved with her family to the United States when she was 13. This excerpt is the beginning of her first book, When I Was Puerto Rican, the first of her 3 memoirs. It tells the true story of her childhood in Puerto Rico and the move to New York. Barco que no ando, no llega a puerto. A ship that doesn't sail never reaches port. There are guavas at the shop and save. I pick one the size of a tennis ball and finger the prickly stem end. It feels familiarly bumpy and firm. The guava is not quite ripe. The skin is still a dark green. I smell it and imagine a pale pink center, the seeds tightly embedded in the flesh. A ripe guava is yellow, although some varieties have a pink tinge. The skin is thick, firm, and sweet. Its heart is bright pink and almost solid with seeds. The most delicious part of the guava surrounds the tiny seeds. If you don't know how to eat a guava, the seeds end up in the crevices between your teeth. When you bite into a ripe guava, your teeth must rip the bumpy surface and sink into the thick, edible skin without hitting the center. It takes experience to do this, as it's quite tricky to determine how far beyond the skin the seeds begin. Some years, when the rains have been plentiful and the nights cool, you can bite into a guava and not find many seeds. The guava bushes grow close to the ground, their branches laden with green, then yellow fruit that seem to ripen overnight. These guavas are large and juicy, almost seedless, their roundness enticing you to have one more, just one more, because next year the rains may not come. As children, we didn't always wait for the fruit to ripen. We raided the bushes as soon as the guavas were large enough to bend the branch.
So you probably realize there were a lot of sensory details in that story. So you can go through this chart and you can think about, I concluded a couple of them. You don't need to submit this to me on Seesaw or anything, but you can go through and think of the different senses in the examples that you saw in the story. So example was sight, right? The guava was the size of a tennis ball. So that really gives you a clear image of how big it was. The touch, it was prickly, right? Like, so that's weird. Like a fruit is prickly. Taste, it was sweet, right? So there are all these different examples that are in the text. You can go through and you can go back to the video and you can find some more. But again, you don't have to submit this to me for work. In Seesaw is you're going to see Personal Narratives Lesson 4. After you watch the video, you're going to review what sensory language is. It's this chart right here, so you can look at it. I'm actually going to click on Add Response right now. I'm the sample student, just so that you can see exactly what it is. Actually, I don't want to do that. Delete. Start over. Okay. All right, sorry. Okay, so you'll look at this chart. It says adding details. These are sensory details, and sensory language is the same thing. Just review this example. It's in your work. After thinking about each of these topics, so look at these topics right here. They're all listed. Choose your favorite to write about. So think of these different topics. The first time I ate my favorite food. A time that eating something made me sick. The first time I ate my least favorite food. The best or worst meal I ever ate at a restaurant, or a very messy eating experience. So think of one of those topics. There's like 5 there, and pick one that you could talk about and you could use sensory details for. So after you've picked one of those from one of those topics, one of those 5 topics, you're going to complete the charts to describe the food you chose by writing sensory details. Try to come up with as many as you can for each sense. I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like. So you're literally just going to type in here. You can type using a text box. You can write. So describe the food you chose by using sensory details. So what did your food look like? what were you hearing when this experience happened? It doesn't just have to be about the food, but like what was going on during the experience. So what were you able to see? What did things look like? What did you hear? What sound does the food make? Maybe like what sounds were going on? Maybe you're in a restaurant. What could you hear around you? Smell. What does the food smell like? What were you able to smell when you were in this experience? What were you able to touch? Like, what does your food feel like? Remember, like with the guava, it was prickly, right? So think about what does your food actually feel like? What were you able to reach out and touch? What did what did they feel like? And then the last one, taste. So what does your food actually taste like? How would you describe it? Sweet, salty, bland, something like that. And once you finish, you can click the green check mark and you can submit it to me. I'm looking forward to reading these. And make sure that you tell me too, like what was your experience about? I'll put another page on here so that you can type what your experience was actually about. So I know exactly what you're talking about.